Hi, so we're live here. Going to show you the Open Liberty devfile application stack. It's a cloud-native Kubernetes development tool. I'm here. This is Scott Kurz with Adam Wisniewski, my team. And Adam's going to kick it off. Can you hear us, Adam?
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Scott. So as Scott said, we're part of the Open Liberty application stack team. We're going to talk today about what the Open Liberty stack is and how you can get started using it for cloud native development. So if you're not familiar with an application stack, it's basically a way to provide all of the tooling and infrastructure that you need to develop an application. So for example, this could be an Open Liberty installation, Maven to build your application, a JDK, tools, libraries, basically anything that you need to end-to-end develop an application. What an application stack does is it packages all of this stuff up in a development image that it then starts and uses to build and run your application. The Open Liberty stack additionally leverages this technology called devfiles and this tool called OpenShift Do to allow you to develop this application directly in a Kubernetes or OpenShift cluster. So this gives you a truer to production development experience, all while still coding directly on your local laptop. So if you're not familiar with devfiles is a YAML-based framework that allows you to describe a development environment for a particular app. The Open Liberty stack uses a devfile to define its infrastructure and that tooling that it needs. And also it predefines the commands that it uses to build and run your app. So none of that has to be done by you. The Open Liberty stack takes care of all of that behind the scenes. I also mentioned this tool called OpenShift Do. So Odoo is a very simple command line interface tool for creating stack projects and also interacting directly with your Kubernetes or your OpenShift cluster. And what's nice about Odoo is that it abstracts a lot of the complexities that you typically see with, OC commands or even lower than that kube control commands. And it allows you to focus on developing your application without having to know that underlying cloud configuration. So the Open Liberty stack also kind of centers around this concept of inner and outer loop development cycles. And very basically, inner loop, when we say that, we're referring to that quick iterative development that you're doing while you're developing an application. So you're coding, you're deploying, you're debugging, and you're continuing through this loop as you make changes. The outer loop is sort of that less frequent but more official production or staging build that you typically see associated with a pipeline. So the Open Liberty stack provides an experience and infrastructure for both of these cycles. And it tries to keep both of them tightly coupled to avoid any discrepancies between the two. For example, Open Liberty versions or versions of Maven and different libraries you're using. It makes sure that both of those are the same, whether you're in a quick iterative inner loop or whether you're in an outer loop pipeline. So currently, the outer loop experience with the Open Liberty stack is still stabilizing. It's still a work in progress, particularly in the devfile and Odoo space. So we're continuing to work to make that more robust, make that a better experience. What you can do today with an outer loop, so the Open Liberty stack provides build and deployment artifacts that you can leverage within an existing pipeline. So you can easily integrate these two artifacts that the Open Liberty stack provides in an existing pipeline you have and build your outer loop that way. So we're going to jump into a demo of this to show how you can do inner loop development with a remote OpenShift cluster. Before I get to that, I just wanted to share a couple links that you might find useful if you want to start today using the Open Liberty stack. So the first link is to the application stack repository. You can see the source code, you can see the different releases that we have, so you can easily get started using the stack. We also have a bunch of guides and tutorials that you can leverage and you can use. If you want to provide feedback or you have questions about any of this, I would recommend using our Gitter page, our developer experience page for Open Liberty. And lastly, if you're curious about Odoo and how you can use that to interact with OpenShift or any Kubernetes environment, you can go to odoo.dev and find more information. So let's hop into a demo and see what this actually looks like. So I have a very basic Maven application right here, just a source and POM file. This is just a simple micro profile app that has a REST endpoint that's just going to return a string. So very basic. There's nothing fancy about this app to make this work with the stack. This is just an existing app I have on my laptop. So I have Odoo installed at the command line, and I'm currently logged into my remote OpenShift cluster. So what I can do from here is use the Odoo command line and do Odoo project create. And this is going to create a namespace for me in my remote cluster. So I'm going to give this a name. So now if I go to my OpenShift console, I can now see that I have a new namespace called demo test. Nothing running currently. So back over to the command line, I'm now ready to initialize this project as a Open Liberty Stack project. I can do Odoo create. I'm going to give it the name of our Open Liberty Stack, which is Java Open Liberty. And I'm going to give this component a name. I'm just going to say my Open Liberty component. And what we can see here now is that a dev file has been downloaded from a default dev file registry. And this dev file, as I mentioned before, is basically the guts of the Open Liberty Stack. This defines the infrastructure. It defines that development image that we're going to be using and all of the commands that the Open Liberty Stack is going to use for us to connect to OpenShift to run this application and to build it. So from here, all we have to do now is Odoo push. And this is going to sync this application out with our remote cluster. And if we go back to our console, we can see that we now have a pod running. And this pod contains that development image that's associated with the stack. This has Open Liberty in it. This has Maven. This has OpenJ9. All of that comes out of the box. Our application is synced, it's built, and it's run all within this pod, just from that one command. So we can also have a few other commands from the Odoo CLI. So we can do an Odoo log. We can see all of that, those Maven commands that were run. You can see the server starting and tests that were run. Now what I want to do is access my app. So the Open Liberty Stack automatically creates a URL for your application, which you can access with Odoo URL list. So I'm going to go over to my browser. And the endpoint for this particular app is at API/resource. We can see we have just a basic hello world string that's returned. So if I want to start developing this application, it's now running out in OpenShift in Open Liberty dev mode. So that means that anytime I make a change out in that container, the change is picked up without having to restart the server. Now, each time I make a change locally, I can either reissue an Odoo push, which is going to sync those changes out with that pod, or I can simply say Odoo watch. This now enables a watcher on my local laptop that when I make changes, it'll sync those changes with my pod. Open Liberty dev mode will automatically pick those up, and my changes will be reflected without restarting the server and also without restarting the pod. So let's take a look at that. So I have my resource here that's returning this string. Going to change this to something else. So now when I save this file, I can see that my changes are synced. And if I go back to my application here and refresh the page, I can see that automatically my application was updated. Again, this is out without restarting the server and without restarting the pod, which is running remotely out in OpenShift. So what happens if you don't have access to a remote Kubernetes or OpenShift cluster? So Scott Kurz is going to go ahead and show how we can do a similar sort of workflow using Minikube locally on our laptop.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I'll share my screen here. Guess that works. There. Did that work? I guess I'll keep going. So I'm going to, I don't know if that worked. Okay, sorry for the delay there. I think that worked. Okay, here we go. All right, so yeah, so although this is an OpenShift, sort of branded tool, OpenShift Do, and developed mainly by Red Hat, we want to emphasize that you don't only have to use OpenShift. You can use any Kubernetes cluster. And while there are a couple of differences, you'll see it works just as well in a Minikube cluster. So here I am on Linux. And before I jump into the project, I just kind of want to show you this other view and show you another thing that a dev file gives you, which is this registry. And so if I do this Odoo catalog list components, you'll see I got these dev files and dev file stacks from this default dev file registry that Odoo's pointing to for a variety of technologies: Quarkus, Spring Boot, Wildfly, Python, and of course OpenLibrary, which we're focused on. So that's a nice way to kind of cut through all the noise and all the thousands of different ways to start development and say here's cloud ready, Kubernetes ready stack for you to start from to start your project with. Okay, so I'm going to clone basically the exact where is it? The exact project that Adam started with. Actually, I'll just, my fingers aren't finding the command, so I'm just going to jump to it here. And I'm going to, let's see, do I already have the dev file in this project? So, one of the things I'm going to show you is that you can certainly check the dev file into your repository. Some workflows, will work well, will prefer that type of approach. Or, you can also create your component and pull the dev file down from the dev file registry at the time you create it. So, okay, I've got the dev file in my registry. One interesting thing I'm kind of just gonna dwell on for a second is I've got a target here, right? So, this is this is a Maven project, right? You can see the palm there. One of the other themes is this isn't really a special Maven project that lets you work with the dev file. It's more or less going to work with your typical Maven work project. You don't have to do something special to use it with our dev file with our stack. So because of that, I actually have a target directory on my workstation, and so I want to check before I push everything up into the pod that I'm ignoring my target directory, because I don't want to push the whole app server and all that stuff up in the cloud. And yes, I do. So Odoo is going to honor this git ignore entry of target, just like Git honors it, and so okay, we're good to go. Maybe that was a little long intro. So okay. I know Minikube started, so maybe I'll show you my current context is pointing to Minikube. Okay, I'm ready to go. I do want to enable the ingress add-on to build an external endpoint that I can access, from outside the container. And okay, it's there. We do what Adam did, create the project. I'm going to create my expert TV project, which I already did that. And now I'm going to create my component. So I'm just going to call it intro. And if I do this, if I try to create a Java Open Liberty component, this error message is saying, no, you already have a dev file. You don't need to get the Java Open Liberty dev file. Just create the component from your existing dev file in your project. Okay, so I've got my component created. If I look in my local directory, I have the Odoo command. I'm sorry, I have an Odoo folder where Odoo keeps some information about this project. I'm using,
Scott, would you mind
before I go
a little bit louder?
What was that?
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind speaking just a little bit louder?
Yeah, let me try that. Okay, so I'm gonna create a URL. I'm gonna look at the cube IP. So I'm going to create a URL and use this IP address together with the nip.io service. And now that I've done that, I'm ready to push. Now, one thing we've done within our dev file is we've cached some common Maven dependencies, common for Open Liberty development, I should say, Open Liberty Maven development in the container that we're building, that we're referencing in our dev file, and that we're doing this inner loop development within. So that will shave a good, minute or so from the startup time. Once you've done the first push of this, you get a pod, you get a deployment, and Kubernetes starts a pod, and you may not need to start another one for quite a while, but it's still good to keep that startup time as small as possible. Okay, so I do the log. I see we're still waiting for the app to start up. Let me just take a quick peek at this dev file. And there's kind of a lot to go through, but I just kind of want to focus that we're basically just running the Liberty dev mode Maven command within a container that is defined in terms of this, special image. And if you look inside this image, it's basically just Maven, an Open Liberty runtime pre-installed, and a bunch of Maven dependencies, like I was saying. So if I look at the log, it's starting up the app. It's configured to run the test automatically, and it's starting now. I could do log -f all the logs. All right, it succeeded. So let's see, I should be able to now do the Odoo URL list and do a curl against this endpoint. and here's the path from guide resource. Okay, yeah, did what Adam did. One nice thing is to be able to kind of go in and out of the container. So, for example, if I wanted to, so I have an HTTP endpoint for external use created through the ingress. I don't have a secure endpoint that I can access internally. However, I do have a secure endpoint configured within the container. If I want to get to that, I could do the O2 exec to exec in. And so here, I'll just show you how I can get the password I need here. So I'm going to O2 exec into O2 exec into my container, grab the password, and then I'm going to O2 exec and do a curl. And I hit the metrics endpoint, my profile metrics endpoint, which is only accessible through the secure endpoint by default. So yeah, that can be useful. Another thing, we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I can show that this is hooked up to a pipeline. So if I do git status, and I'll add my git ignore here. And I didn't set up this remote. Well, yeah, that area is kind of immature anyway. But as Adam was saying, you can use this in pipeline eventually. And one thing I can show on that note is that there's no Docker file here. There's no deploy YAML. So let me switch over to another project. So that that's the same project Adam showed, and I will show that this point that you can use an existing project. I think someone might be trying to talk over or interrupt me. Hopefully, I'm just going to stop sharing for a sec. Okay, maybe I was wrong. So like I was saying, this doesn't have to be a special project. I'm going to go to the OpenLiberty guides page where we have a bunch of nice samples with documentation, walking through, playing around with them and getting familiar with different technologies. I'm going to steer away from anything that includes like a database or, external dependency like that, or anything that has its own Docker build or Kubernetes sort of workflow, as one of the points of the guide. But if I look just say at like this REST client, so I'll pick this REST client, and you can see it's this interactive guide. If I take this and now I'm going to go over to my Windows machine here, and I think I already have this one, so I'm going to cd into this guide, REST client, Java. And I'm going to remove the Odoo folder that's already there. And I'm going to create a, so if I look at the current context here, I'm pointed to my OpenShift cluster. And I'm going to do an Odoo create here. Okay. Now, I don't have to work in an IDE because I can do a compilation within the container. These guys are laid out with the start and finish folder, so I'm going to switch to the finish folder, and I'm going to just import this into an Eclipse IDE. Okay, and so let's see, it's got an integration test, it's got services, it's a REST client guide, so it's got one service that calls another. I don't need to create the endpoint because now I'm using OpenShift, not Intune, so I'm just going to push this right to the cluster. And it's going to take a little bit longer here because I think we don't have as many of the dependencies cached. And I think the last time I did this, I broke some things, so I'm going to restore and try pushing again. Okay, on my test run. So, see, I looked at the sample ahead of time, so I know what to do. So I'm gonna run this one URL and pipe it through JQ. And one of the perks of using Windows is dealing with the different shells, Sigma, Git Bash, PowerShell. So I'm gonna switch over to PowerShell, which got set up to handle this better. And I get the output, and I go into the IDE. So I gotta push first. And because I've got dev mode running inside my container, that's just going to get picked up. The application is just going to get picked up. And doesn't affect my test. My test tree ran successfully. So if I run Perl again, yep, I see the change. So yeah, you can create a new project with the dev file, or you should be able to add it to many existing projects. And that's all for now. I think we'll try to do another session when we've got the outer loop hooked up and we can show you the GitOps angle on this. Thanks. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, Scott. That was a great demo of Minikube. So it looks like we have some questions that we see in our chat here. So one question is there a free tier of this so that it can be tested and that you can start using this? So everything right now that we were demoing with the Open Liberty stack is entirely free. So Open Liberty is free. You can start using that. You can start using this stack right out of the box. As long as you have Odoo installed, and you are logged into some Kubernetes cluster, whether that's locally like Minikube, like Scott was showing, you can start using this. So you can start doing exactly what we did just by having Odoo installed to the command line.
I put a link into the chat to a Getting Started article that explains how to use this with Minikube. There's also a question, can we use WebSphere Liberty in place of Open Liberty? And while WebSphere Liberty, when you look at the contents and the feature set, it's very similar to Open Liberty these days. The short answer is no. It is, because we had to build specific images out of specific binaries, we only have the Open Liberty binary available today. Our project too is open source, so in theory, someone could go and build a stack, build an image, copy our dev file, make the Open Liberty to WebSphere Liberty substitution, and put together their own WebSphere Liberty stack. But no, short answer, it's only Open Liberty at the moment. I mean, if you've looked at the Open Liberty versus WebSphere Docker tooling, you'll see that it's all pretty similar. The Liberty Maven plugin can seamlessly install or target Open Liberty or WebSphere Liberty. So it's not that much that has to be done except package the whole thing. But yeah, that answers that question, I hope.
And that's a good point too, that out of the box, the stack that we're providing is completely functional for Open Liberty, for some of the tools and infrastructure that's provided. But you could imagine that this stack could almost act as a sample, and that it can be tailored however your business needs. So you can provide your own development image based off of ours. You can change how the dev file functions depending on different types of applications. So you can basically use this stack even as a starting point to tailor your stack to whatever you might need.
I think another simplification of this whole demo here is that we're not showing a database, which is the other direction we need to expand to next, and it's high in our agenda. So I think we answered all the questions in the YouTube chat.
If there's any other questions after this, you watch this video, or as you're playing around with this and trying it out for yourself, the Open Liberty Gitter channel is you're welcome to ask any questions or give any feedback in there. All right, so I think that's it for what we have to show. Scott, was there anything else that we wanted to talk about?
No, thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone for watching.